The wind screamed across the frozen plains of Ceres 9. A moon covered in endless ice, snow fell like dust, and the cold was sharp enough to burn skin. No animals moved, no machines roared, no voices echoed. Just silence and snow. Callan, a human, explorer and scavenger, walked slowly across the ice. His boots crunched in the snow. His breath fogged up his helmet visor. He held a scanner in one hand and a thermal rifle in the other. He was not here for adventure, he was here to survive. He had come to Ceres 9 chasing rumors. Some said an old alien ship had crashed here full of lost tech, maybe even weapons. But so far, he had found only ice and broken metal. He sighed and tapped his scanner again, hoping for something new. Suddenly, a weak signal blinked on the screen. But warm, his eyes narrowed. No life signs, the scanner said. But heat detected. Heat, in a place like this, meant something unusual, something alive, for something dying. Callan followed the signal, step by step, through sharp winds and thick snow. After an hour, he saw something strange in the distance. A dark hole in the ice. Like a wound in the land, he walked to the edge and looked down. A large crack had opened in the ground, leading into a deep cave. He climbed down, carefully, holding onto frozen roots and jagged rock. At the bottom, he saw it, and his heart stopped. Lying in the center of the cave, half covered in frost, was a dragon. But this was no ordinary dragon. She was massive, nearly 20 meters long, with wings folded and torn. Her scales were pure white like fresh snow and shimmered faintly even in the dark. Her body was covered in bruises, dried blood, and strange burn marks. She was breathing slow and painful. Her eyes were closed and her body barely moved. Chains still clung to one of her back legs, broken at the base. Someone had trapped her and left her here to die. Callan stood frozen, staring at the creature. He had heard stories about dragons, but they were legends, myths, fairy tales. People said the last dragon died 200 years ago. But this one was real, and she was here. In front of him, she let out a weak growl, her eyes opening slightly. Bright silver eyes met his, full of fear, pain, and confusion. Callan raised his hand slowly. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." She flinched but didn't attack. She was too weak to fight. Callan looked around, then dropped his pack and pulled out a heat lamp. He turned it on and placed it near her body. Warmth spread slowly through the cave. He opened his emergency food pack and pulled out a sealed protein bar. He unwrapped it, broke a piece, and placed it in front of her. The dragon sniffed it, then closed her eyes again. She was too weak to eat. Callan sighed and sat down near the wall. He stared at her for a long time, then finally whispered, "You're not a beast, are you?" He worked through the night. He cleaned the wounds on her leg using water from melted snow. He wrapped a cloth around her tail where it was bleeding. She didn't move much, but she watched him with tired eyes. He built a small fire near the wall and cooked another protein bar, this time with heat. When he held it out again, she slowly leaned forward and took it from his hand, carefully. Without biting, he smiled a little. "There you go," he said. "You're going to live, okay?" She said nothing, of course, but she lay her head down beside him, as if she understood, as if she trusted him, just a little. In the morning, Callan stood outside the cave, checking the scanner again. But something wasn't right. The signal had changed. There were now 2 heat signatures nearby. One was the dragon, and the other was moving. His stomach tightened. "Someone else is here," he whispered. He turned back and looked at the dragon. She was still sleeping, her body rising and falling slowly. She looked peaceful but also helpless. Callan knew what he had to do. He picked up his rifle and stepped out into the storm again. Whoever was out there might be coming for her, and he wouldn't let them take her. Callan stood at the cave entrance, snow hitting his visor like soft bullets. His scanner showed movement just over the next hill. He held his rifle tight, his body tense, heart beating fast. He wasn't alone anymore, and that could mean trouble. Down in the cave, the albino dragon still slept. Her breath was slow and shallow. her body too weak to move much. Callan had cleaned her wounds, but she needed time, food, and safety. None of those could be found in the open snow. He climbed the slope carefully, boots slipping on the ice. When he reached the top, he lay flat and looked through his scope. And there, moving slowly through the storm, was a ship, small, black, and marked with red claws on its side. His eyes narrowed. He had seen those markings before. Alien poachers. They hunted rare animals, sold them to collectors across the galaxy. They didn't care about laws, life, or suffering. They cared only for money, and now they were back. Maybe they had returned to check on their prize, the dragon. Maybe they were looking for her body, or maybe they had seen smoke from Callan's fire, and now they were hunting him too. Callan returned to the cave fast. The dragon opened her eyes as he entered. He dropped his gear and knelt beside her. "They're back," he said quietly. "The ones who did this to you." She blinked slowly, her pupils tightening. He could see fear rising again. She tried to lift her head but failed, her body too weak. Callan said, placing a hand on her shoulder gently. "You're safe for now. But we have to be smart." She stared at him, silent, watching but no longer afraid of him, only of what was coming. Callan worked quickly. He turned off the fire and covered it with snow to hide the smoke. He moved their supplies deeper into the cave and blocked the entrance with a sheet of reflective ice. He set up motion traps and alarm sensors, and finally, he covered the dragon's body with a heat blanket and snow. She didn't like it, but she allowed it, somehow. She knew it was necessary. He sat beside her, holding his rifle, eyes on the shadows. Hours passed, the cold grew sharper, but he didn't sleep. Not with danger outside and a helpless dragon beside him. In the stillness, Callan spoke again. He wasn't sure why, but talking helped. "Do you know," he said softly, "when I was younger I had a sister. She was small, always smiling. She loved stars, loved to sing." The dragon's head turned slightly, her eyes focused on him. "One day, during a raid, our shelter was bombed. I was outside, she wasn't. I dug for hours, but all I found was her toy. Burned." His voice cracked a little, but he continued. "I never forgave myself for leaving her. I swore if I ever found someone in need, I'd stay." The dragon let out a soft sound, a low, gentle hum. It wasn't loud, but it made Callan pause. He looked at her and smiled sadly. "Yeah, you understand, don't you?" That night, he gave her another protein bar softened by heat and cut into small pieces. She ate slowly, her strength returning bit by bit. Her wings twitched once as if remembering flight, but pain made her stop. Callan placed a soft cloth under her injured leg. "It's going to take time," he said, "but I'll help you heal." She stared at him again, then closed her eyes, not from fear, but from trust, and slowly, gently, she rested her head near his side. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stayed close, letting the moment be silent and safe. Outside, the storm howled. The poacher ship had landed and dark figures moved through the snow. They didn't know exactly where she was, but they were close, very close, inside the cave. Callan checked the motion sensor. One red light blinked movement. 50 meters from the entrance. His jaw tightened, and he grabbed his rifle again. He looked back at the dragon, still asleep, then whispered to the wind, "You had your chance to leave her. Now you'll deal with me." He took one last breath, then faded into the shadows of the cave, waiting, watching, protecting. The dragon stirred slightly, and even in sleep, a single tear rolled down from her glowing eye. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he. The night was cold and full of danger. Snowflakes fell slowly like ash from a dead sky. Callan sat hidden inside the cave, just beyond the entrance. His rifle was ready, and his eyes stayed fixed on the motion sensor blinking red. He knew the poachers were near. They were hunting the dragon again. Maybe they thought she was still weak, still dying, but this time she wasn't alone behind him. The albino dragon slept under a blanket of snow and heat cloth. Her wounds were healing little by little. She was still too weak to fly or fight. But her heart was stronger. Now Callan had seen it in her eyes. He whispered into his comlink. Motion detected. 2 figures. 40 meters. Of course, no one answered. He was alone. But saying it out loud helped him stay sharp, stay human. Footsteps approached the cave slow. Careful, Callan heard metal crunch under boots. Through a gap in the ice, he saw them. 2 poachers, both armed, both scanning the area with thermal goggles. One of them spoke in an alien language, sharp, cold words. Then he pointed toward the cave wall. They had seen traces of heat. They were coming in. Callan pulled a small sphere from his pocket, a flash grenade. He didn't want to kill them. He didn't have to, but he would do anything to protect her. He waited until the first poacher stepped inside. Then click, he rolled the grenade forward. Flash. A bright white light filled the cave entrance. The poachers screamed and stumbled back. Blinded and off balance, Callan rushed forward and kicked one of them to the ground. The second fired his blaster, missing by inches. Callan slammed the butt of his rifle into the alien's chest, knocking him out cold. It was over in less than 20 seconds. But Callan's heart was still pounding like a war drum. He dragged both bodies outside and tied their hands with wire rope. He left them out in the snow with a warning message written in red. Leave this moon. She is not yours. Back in the cave, the dragon had woken up. She looked at him with wide, worried eyes. Callan sat beside her and smiled gently. They found us, he said, but they didn't win. She blinked slowly, then let out a low, musical sound, something between a hum and a sigh. Callan leaned back and laughed softly. I'll take that as a thank you. He reached into his pack and pulled out some water and dried fruit. Time for dinner, he said, breaking the fruit into small bites. She opened her mouth slowly, accepting the food with care. Later, as the cave grew quiet again, Callan sat near the small fire. He held a worn notebook and started writing. He was recording everything, how he found her, how she survived, what he saw in her eyes. I don't want history to forget you, he whispered while writing. Someone has to know the truth, that dragons feel, dragons remember, dragons matter. The dragon shifted beside him and laid her head near his legs. Her scales shimmered under the firelight. Her breathing was steady, her eyes gentle. She was not a beast. She was someone. The next morning, Callan stepped out of the cave to check the area. Snow had covered the poacher's tracks, but his sensors told him more were nearby. This was not over. More would come, maybe tomorrow, maybe sooner. He had to prepare. He returned to the cave and set up more traps, small alarms, motion spikes, and noise bombs. The dragon watched him work, curious. You want to help? Callan asked, smiling. He handed her a small metal rod. She tilted her head and tapped it with her claw, creating a sharp spark. He laughed. That's one way to say yes. That night, he showed her old images on his datapad. Pictures of Earth green, trees, blue skies, cities, and children. She stared at the screen with wonder in her silver eyes. When a photo of a small girl appeared, she paused longer. That was my sister, Callan said softly. She loved stories about dragons. The dragon blinked slowly and lowered her head near the screen. Then, gently, she made a soft sound, deep and melodic, like a lullaby. Callan froze, surprised. That was music, he said. You can sing? She repeated the tune, a little louder this time. Her voice echoed off the ice walls. Beautiful, sad, and ancient. It made the cave feel like a cathedral. Callan felt tears form in his eyes. You're not just real, he whispered. You're alive in every way. The poachers may have seen a creature to sell, but Callan now saw a soul. A wounded soul with wings waiting to fly again. He placed his hand gently on her neck. Don't worry, he said. I'll fight for you. And in that quiet, snowy cave on a forgotten moon, man and dragon looked at each other. No words, no fear, only trust. Because sometimes, the strongest bond begins not with talking, but with simply being there. The days grew colder on Ceres 9. Snowstorms came more often now, stronger and louder. The wind howled like wolves, and the sky turned dark even during the day, but inside the hidden ice cave, something warm was starting to grow. Callan had turned the cave into a shelter. He added lights, more traps outside, and even carved out small shelves in the walls. The albino dragon, whom he now called Vesha, was healing. Her eyes were clearer, and her breathing stronger still. She could not stand on her legs for long. Her wing was badly torn, her bones not yet whole, but her spirit. That was no longer broken. One night, Callan sat beside her with a small heating pad and medicine. She let him touch her wing gently. Though the pain made her tremble, he looked into her eyes and whispered, "Soon you'll fly again, Vesha." Blinked slowly, as if trying to believe him. He offered her a piece of warm fruit and chuckled. "I never thought I'd feed a dragon," he said, "let alone care for one." She let out a small, low sound, half a hum, half a laugh. It made him smile wider. Every day, she trusted him more, and he never took it for granted. But trouble never stayed far on Ceres 9. That same night, while Callan checked the outer traps, he saw a fire on the horizon. Through his scope, he spotted 3 more ships landing, poacher ships, larger than before. More hunters were coming, and this time, they weren't scouting, they were ready for war. He ran back to the cave and quickly shut the outer wall. Vesha sensed the tension and stood weakly, her claws scratching the floor. "No," he said softly, guiding her back down. "You need to stay hidden. I'll deal with them." She growled low, not angry, but protective. Callan knelt in front of her and touched her forehead gently. "You saved yourself once, now let me save you." He placed explosives near the ice ridge and set traps along the narrow path. Then, he dug a trench and covered it with snow, hiding sharpened rods below. He positioned himself on high ground with his rifle. This time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. When the poachers arrived, they came in fast, 6 of them, heavily armed. One of them shouted, "We know you're hiding it. Hand over the dragon." Callan answered with silence, then boom. He triggered the first trap. A fire burst shot up, blinding 2 of the poachers. One fell into the trench screaming. The others spread out and started firing into the snow. Callan moved carefully, shooting only when needed, but he knew he couldn't fight them all, not for long. Inside the cave, Vesha watched the battle through a small opening. She could feel his fear, his pain. Her heart pounded, her body burned. She let out a deep roar, but it was weak, broken. She tried to stand again, her legs shaking, her wings twitching. She pressed against the wall of the cave and cried out a deep, loud sound that echoed across the mountains. It was not a scream of pain, it was a call, outside. The poachers stopped for a moment, stunned by the noise. Callan looked up, confused. Suddenly, light poured out from the cave, soft blue and white, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then the snow near the entrance exploded outward. Vesha stepped into the open, her body still weak, but her eyes blazing. Her white scales shimmered like stars, and smoke rose from her breath. The poachers gasped, backing away. "She's alive." One of them shouted, "She's glowing." Callan stood frozen, awe in his eyes. He had never seen anything so powerful or beautiful. Vesha raised her wings slowly, painfully, but she stood tall. The wind circled her body, snow rising around her like a storm, and then fire lit in her chest. She opened her mouth and released a blast of blue flame into the sky. It wasn't strong, but it was enough. The poachers screamed and ran, dropping weapons and gear as they fled. One shouted into his comlink, "Abort. She's not weak anymore." Their ships lifted off fast, leaving trails of smoke behind. Vesha dropped to her knees, exhausted. Callan rushed to her side and wrapped her in a heat blanket. He whispered, "You did it. You really did it." She looked at him with tired but proud eyes, and then without warning, she pressed her head gently into his chest. A soft, warm gesture of thanks, of trust, of friendship. Later that night, Callan sat beside her in the quiet cave. She slept peacefully now, curled into a ball, her breathing steady. He stared at the fire and said aloud, You're not a monster. You're a miracle. And outside, above the frozen plains of Ceres 9, the snow still fell, but now it fell on something new. A bond of flame and trust between man and dragon. And deep in the heart of Vesha, the fire had awakened, not just to fight, but to live again. 2 months passed since the world first saw Vesha. The albino dragon who once lay broken in the snow was now standing strong. Her wings had healed slowly, one still a bit weaker. But she could fly again. She flew not to escape, but to protect. Callan stood at the landing pad of the Ceres 9 outpost. He watched her rise into the pale sky like a shining arrow of white and blue. Children cheered below as she soared above their heads. Her shadow danced across the snow, and her hum echoed through the valley like a song. She wasn't just a dragon anymore. She was a symbol of survival, of kindness, of trust between two very different beings. Everywhere across human colonies and alien worlds, stories of Vesha spread like fire. Holoscreens showed videos of her flying beside Callan in patrol ships. Messages filled the networks. She's not a threat, she's a guardian. She protects refugee camps. She saved a cargo ship from pirates. People who once feared dragons now called her the White Star. Some even said, if dragons like her exist, maybe peace between all races is possible. Governments tried to control the message, but it was too late. The public had already chosen. Vesha was not just accepted, she was loved. Callan still wore the same jacket, old and patched. He didn't want medals or politics, he only cared about Vesha. And she stayed close to him, always, sometimes curled beside his bed like a silent protector. Sometimes flying far, only to return the moment he called her name. One evening, they flew together across the ridge. Snow sparkled under the sunset, and the stars began to blink above. Callan leaned forward and whispered into her ear, I never thought my life would turn out like this. Vesha let out a soft hum, then turned her head slightly. Almost smiling, he added, I used to be just a scavenger, lost, alone. And now I have a purpose. She slowed her flight and landed near a small hill. Callan climbed down, and they sat together under the stars. Nearby, a group of young children from the refugee village waved at them. Callan smiled and waved back. One child asked, Can she sing again? Vesha tilted her head, then released a soft tone, gentle, deep, peaceful. The children clapped, and one girl whispered, She sings like hope. Later that night, Callan sat by a fire at the edge of the outpost. He held his old notebook, flipping through its worn pages. He stopped at the very first page, the day he found her in the ice. He wrote a final line. I went looking for a legend and found a friend. She didn't need saving. We saved each other. Vesha lay behind him, curled like a giant cat, her breath calm. She had scars, but she wore them like medals. She had wings, but she used them to protect, not escape. She had a voice, and now the galaxy listened at Tat. A large council meeting broadcast across planets. Callan stood again, this time, not as a lone explorer, but as a voice for something bigger. He spoke into the mic, his voice calm and honest. Vesha is more than a dragon, he said. She's proof that the old stories weren't lies, they were warnings. Fear divides us, but trust brings us back together. We didn't tame her, he added. We respected her, and in return, she chose to stand with us. The council gave her full protection status. No one could hunt, cage, or harm her. She became a guardian of lost lands, a voice of peace between broken colonies, and beside her, always, was Callan, the man who stayed when others would have run. Years passed, and their story turned into books, music, paintings, even starships named after her. The name Vesha became more than a name, it became hope. In refugee camps, children drew dragons with silver eyes. On military bases, soldiers pinned tiny dragon symbols to their gear for luck. And in a quiet place far from the cities, a statue stood tall. Callan with his arm outstretched, and Vesha beside him, wings wide, eyes proud. Below the statue were carved simple words. He found her broken. But what he gave her was freedom, and what she gave him was a reason to live. And so the legend lived on, not just in stories, but in the skies, in hearts, in every act of kindness between strangers. Because when one man helped one dragon, the whole world changed forever. Snowflakes floated gently outside the cave. The sky above Ceres 9 was dark again, lit only by distant stars. Inside the cave, the fire crackled softly, warming the air. Callan sat beside Visha. The albino dragon, still shaken from what had happened, she had stood, roared, and lit the sky with blue fire. The poachers had fled, terrified of a dragon they thought was near death. But the price of that fire was high. Vesha now lay still, breathing heavily, her eyes half closed. She had used the last of her strength to protect Callan. Now she was fading. Callan placed his hand gently on her white scales. "You saved me," he whispered. "Now it's my turn again." He opened his medkit and pulled out all he had: pain blockers, healing gel, heat packs, water, food. He fed her slowly, piece by piece, speaking soft words. Vesha's eyes blinked weakly, but she ate. Her body trembled, but she didn't stop trying. Callan knew this couldn't continue. They couldn't hide here forever. The poachers would return with more ships, better weapons, and this time they might bring something worse, traps that even Vesha's fire couldn't stop. "We need to move," Callan said, mostly to himself. But how? He looked at her wings, still torn, one side healing better than the other. Her legs were stronger now, but her wing, it would never be perfect again. Still, it might be enough for one last flight. One chance. He stood and walked to the cave wall where he kept his emergency beacon. He tapped the screen. Nearest outpost 90 kilometers west, a human research tower, hidden behind a frozen ridge. If they could reach it, she'd be safe, and help would arrive within hours. But getting there meant flying, and flying meant risking everything. He turned to her slowly. "Vesha," he said, kneeling beside her, "I have an idea, but it's dangerous." She lifted her head, listening. He showed her the map on the datapad, tracing the path with his finger. "This tower. It's the only place nearby with med tech and protection. I can't carry you there," he said with a weak smile. "But maybe you can carry me." Her eyes widened slightly. She looked at her own wings, then back at him. The silence was long, heavy, but full of meaning. Then she slowly stood. Her body wobbled, wings shaking. But she stood tall again. She opened her wings, weak but wide, and let out a low sound. She was ready to try. The next hour was spent preparing. Callan packed only the most important items: first aid, food, beacon, and tools. He strapped it all into a survival pod and attached it tightly to her side. Then he climbed carefully onto her back, adjusting a harness made from leftover cables and straps. His hands shook, not from fear of falling, but from the weight of what this meant. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Vesha let out a soft breath, warm and slow. She bent her legs, spread her wings, and ran toward the cave entrance. With a mighty push, she leapt into the cold air. Her wings caught the wind unevenly, but they held. Callan gripped her tightly as they rose into the sky. Below them, the cave disappeared, and the white land opened like a sea of ice. The flight was rough. Vesha's left wing dragged slightly, and her body shook with every gust of wind. But she kept going, every beat of her wings a cry of power, a fight against weakness. Callan looked ahead, eyes locked on the horizon. "You can do it," he whispered again and again. "You're almost there." Then suddenly a sharp sound cut through the wind. Behind them, a drone appeared, flying fast with red lights blinking, a poacher's eye in the sky. It locked on them and began to follow. A red laser beam marked their path, and in seconds it fired. The first shot missed, but the second grazed Vesha's tail. She screamed in pain and dropped slightly in the air. Callan pulled out his blaster and aimed, backfiring 3 quick shots. The drone jerked, sparked, and crashed into the snow below. But the damage was done. Vesha was bleeding. Again, her wings flapped harder, but she was losing height. Just a little more. Callan shouted. Look! The tower! There, rising from the white hills, was the outpost tower, tall, gray, and shining with blue lights. He pressed the beacon and fired a flare into the sky. Red light burst like a star, marking their location. Vesha gave one final push, wings shaking. Chest heaving, she reached the tower's landing pad and collapsed. Sliding across the ice, Callan rolled off and ran to her side. Hold on! He shouted, waving to the camera above the door. Within seconds, the doors opened, and medbots rushed out. They lifted Vesha with care and scanned her wounds. One bot turned to Callan and spoke. Subject critical but stable. Immediate treatment required. Callan dropped to his knees, exhausted but smiling. She's not a subject, he whispered. She's family. And as the doors closed behind them, the storm outside faded, and a new chapter began for the dragon who flew, and the man who believed in her. The medical room inside the outpost tower was bright, warm, and clean, for the first time in weeks. Callan could finally breathe without smoke, frost, or fear. But he didn't rest. He stayed by Vesha's side, watching her heartbeat rise and fall on the monitor. The albino dragon lay still on the large platform, surrounded by quiet machines and glowing lights. Her body was badly hurt, burned tail, cracked wing, torn muscles, but she was alive. Callan sat beside her, holding her front claw gently. He whispered, You made it. She made it. He repeated to himself like a prayer. Outside the outpost tower, news traveled fast. The emergency beacon had triggered automatic alerts across nearby sectors. One word in the system shocked everyone. Dragon, within hours, signals from government stations, science labs, and media. Ships flooded the network. First live dragon sighting in 200 years. Is she dangerous? Should she be studied or feared? Who is the human who brought her in? Cameras on drones hovered over the snowy base, broadcasting the image to billions. The world was watching, and not all eyes were kind. 3 days later, a team of officials arrived, scientists, military, diplomats, all in shiny black suits. They walked into the medical bay with cold eyes and quiet voices. Callan stood up as they approached Vesha's bed. One man, tall with gray hair and a silver badge, looked at him and said, You are Callan Dross, correct? Yes, Callan replied, standing firm. And this is Vesha, he said, pointing to the sleeping dragon. She's not a thing. She's someone. The officials ignored his words. They looked at charts, scanned her body, took notes. She's stable but weak, one of them said, and rare. Very rare. Callan stepped forward, voice sharp. She's not for sale, not for labs. She's not your experiment. The room went quiet. One woman in a white coat asked softly, How do you know she won't hurt anyone? Callan looked at Vesha, then back at them. Because she had the chance to kill me, and she didn't. She protected me. She fought for me. She trusted me. That night, Callan sat on the tower roof, watching stars blink in the sky. He felt tired, unsure what would happen next. Would they take her away? Lock her in a cage? Study her until she faded? He reached into his pack and pulled out his notebook, one he had written in during those long cave nights. He flipped through the pages, then placed it in front of a drone camera. He stared directly into the lens and spoke, slowly and clearly. My name is Callan, and I found a dragon, not a weapon. Not a creature, but a soul. She sings, she listens, she feels. She is not a threat, she is hope. If you hurt her, you hurt the part of us that still believes in magic. If you help her, we all heal. He sent the message out to the galaxy. Within hours, it was viral. Billions watched, shared, and commented. Hashtags like #LetHerLove, #DragonTrust, and #VESHA speaks filled every network. The next morning, something incredible happened. Vesha opened her eyes and slowly lifted her head. Callan rushed to her side, smiling wide. "You're awake." She looked at him, blinked, then gave a soft hum, a sound like music. Callan leaned closer. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. Vesha shifted, then pressed her nose gently to his chest. A quiet, loving touch. Callan laughed through tears. "Yeah. You know," doctors watched from behind the glass walls, silent and stunned. "This dragon wasn't wild, wasn't broken. She was alive and aware." Over the next few days, people began to arrive, not soldiers or hunters, but children, scientists, peacekeepers. They came to listen, to watch, to understand, and Vesha allowed them. She let the children touch her scales, listen to music, even mimicked soft human words with her hums. A connection had begun, the same kind Callan had shared in the cave. Callan stood at the edge, watching it all. People cried, people smiled, people believed again. "She's changing us," one woman said. "More than we're changing her." One day, Callan stood in front of a massive crowd inside the outpost auditorium. He was now a hero, not because he fought, but because he stayed. He cleared his throat and said, "Vesha reminded me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sings. Sometimes it just survives. She's not just a dragon," he added. "She's family." Vesha walked onto the stage beside him. Slow but steady, she spread her wings, still healing but proud. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying, and somewhere across the stars, the legend of a white dragon and the human who believed in her began to grow.